Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about something completely different than we've ever talked about before. I'm going to read you a chapter from my book, Hiding Behind God, that talks about constructs and making God into things that he never claimed to be, and how we judge other people for what they wear, the tattoos that they have. If you're not religious, that's okay. We get around to your thoughts too. And maybe the reality that our current secular society is living in the same way by the same behaviors that the religious society of 50 years ago that they're reacting to lived. In other words, maybe they're engaging in the same behaviors that they are trying to squash. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to the Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right. Hello, my friends. Welcome. I hope your day is going well wherever you are doing. Wow. Wherever you are doing whatever it is you're doing, I hope your day is going well. This episode is going to be unedited. It is just straight from me to the mic to the computer to you. We're normally a little bit ahead, but we've run into some issues technology-wise. And then I got some sort of sinus infection, chest infection thing that just didn't go away. And every time I tried to record it or tried to record anything, it sounded pretty awful. Sessions with my clients were pretty interesting because they would look at me and I'd be like, I promise I'm not contagious. And I'm not sure, obviously, what it was. I skipped all the days of medical school. I'm not a doctor. But like if you listen to last week's episode, you can definitely hear, on the intro, I had to re-record the intro, and you can definitely hear little pieces of it, and it just didn't work for a full 30-minute thing. I've tried to record a couple times, and one time one of the mics broke. It's just been one of those things. And so this is just I told my daughter, we're just going old school. We're going to go straight to recording, from recording to you. I do want to let you know about something new going on. If you're interested in these topics, and I realize that not all of my friends are, but if you're interested in how spirituality, religion, our beliefs about God, our beliefs about what God intends for us, our beliefs about what does God want from us, how does that intersect with psychology and our lives and how we live our lives, I'm excited to announce that I do have a new blog, and this is a direct-to-you blog. It's not on joemartino.com, but you can get to it. Eventually, you'll be able to get to it from there. The blog itself is called Does God Care About Our Theology? For years, I have thought that a wonderful book series would be God Doesn't Care About Our Theology, which immediately probably sets the shackles and hackles, probably not shackles, maybe shackles, but certainly the hackles of all of my, not all, but many of my, seminary-type friends on edge, because they clearly believe that God does care about our theology, and the truth is that I do as well. But the idea comes from James, where he talks about, I'll show you my faith by my works. In other words, theology that doesn't move our life really isn't worth all that much. A theology that is just something that we keep inside our head, or we use to talk about, or we use to debate, it's not very helpful. And I've had 3 books, for that trilogy that I've thought about writing. One of them is called Hiding Behind God, which is the URL for the blog. So it is hidingbehindgod.substack.com. That's hidingbehindgod.substack.com. And there's not a lot up there right now. There's one post where I just posted my notes from a sermon that I was listening to, questions that I had as the pastor was preaching. There is an initial blog post that explains kind of what's going on with the blog, what readers can expect if they sign up, and that type of thing. And eventually there might be another podcast called Hiding Behind God where we just talk about those issues. I'm still kind of working that out in my head. What's the best way to do that? I will say that I put everything together and I wasn't quite ready, but it went public. I'm not really all that proficient in Substack currently. And so as I was doing it, it just went up, and then I was trying to figure out how to save it or how to share it to Facebook and X, formerly known as Twitter. How long do we have to say that? Formerly known as Twitter. Anyhow, I was trying to figure out how to share it to social media without actually sharing it, and I actually shared it, and people signed up. People signed up that I don't know. People signed up before I ever even did that. People have emailed me about it already, and so I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the conversations it's going to have. I do have a manuscript written called Hiding Behind God. You can find a couple of those very rough chapters on my website again, joemartino.com. I'm looking here real quickly to see if I can find any of the posts, like the dates for you. How can we thrive even when life is challenging? Can I just tell you, between me and you, the 12 of you that listen, I hate trying to come up with blog titles. I hate it. I use software to help me rate it. Like the software tells me this is good or it sucks. And I'm still not a big fan of that. Okay, so I found one, February 5th, 2024. So if you go to my website and look for Suits and Tattoos, the new measurements of your love for others, it is chapter 4. It's a very rough draft of chapter 4. I want to read a portion of it to you today because I want to talk about it. And for those of my friends who are like, dude, I don't care about church things, it's okay. This will come around to you as well. All right, so chapter 4, Suits and Tattoos. The church should be where everyone can come, no matter where they are, no matter what they are wearing. In fact, many churches advertise that this is precisely what they are. Come as you are is their mantra, and it's been this way for many years. Of course, it's not entirely honest. You can come as you are as long as you eventually end up looking like us. If we're a hip, progressive church that wears casual clothing, we'll tolerate your suit for a bit. If we're a suit, power dressing church, we'll tolerate your jeans for a short while. This is hiding behind God in clothes. And so I'm just going to jump in here for a minute out of reading mode and into talking to you mode. The idea behind the book, I was having a conversation years ago with my wife when we were talking about something, and she said, well, that's just hiding behind God. And I was like, whoa, that's a phrase we need to explore. The idea is we hide in things, often really good things, but we're hiding behind God to avoid the world that we're called to live in, the world that we're called to bring Jesus to. And I think this is one of the beefs that our non-faith friends have with us. They hear us say we have the best news, but we don't live that out by actually being welcoming no matter what. I was sitting one time in a church service listening to a couple who was telling us why they wanted to start a new church near our area. And the wife said that they wanted to have a very welcoming church in one breath. In the next breath, she says, and I was sitting in church looking around and it was just a bunch of old people, and I don't want my church to be old people. Well, then we're not all that welcoming to old people. Right? And I want to have conversations about this, which is why I wrote the book. I'm terrified to print it, which is why I'm making this an episode of it, because it kind of puts me on public notice. And so I'm going to jump back in here and pick up reading. In the second paragraph, I start with this. My friend Zach is an alcoholic. He would argue with me on that point. He has argued with me on that point. He's been married several times, and we met because he left his wife for a 3-month sabbatical. He just forgot to tell her it was a sabbatical. One day we were talking about church, and he was distraught. Why was he upset? Well, that's a great question. He was upset because his church let some guy serve communion in shorts. I had to see his hairy legs. That doesn't bring honor to God. We're not one of those liberal churches. To me, the obvious question for Zach is, did his drinking or cheating on his wives bring honor to God? Zach's problem is he's hiding from those things by worrying about what other people are wearing. Of course, he's not new at it. When I was a kid, a couple lived about a half mile from my house. They had 2 boys that bracketed my age. One was a year older than me and one was a year younger. The parents were deaf and their life was difficult as a low-income family in rural Pennsylvania. Some tragedies had occurred in their family outside of ordinary disasters that strike all of us. I'm trying to remember what they were, and I can't recall them. I was the odd kid out because I went to a Christian school. The boys were very accepting of me and treated me like one of them. This was obviously important to a kid. In return, they were treated like one of us. They ate at our house, and we regularly hung out at the park where their family home was located. I wasn't allowed to play Little League because it would have required me to miss church on Wednesday nights. But both of those boys played, though. As far as I know, their family was not religious. I would attend their games regularly, of course when they weren't on Wednesday nights, because they were my friends. As an overthinking teen, eager to share the love of Jesus with everyone, I would sign language "Jesus loves you" to the parents at almost every game. One day, Theo, the older boy, and not his real name, asked me why I would do that. I started to explain my faith in a less than coherent manner. Somehow, Theo asked me about church, and he and I agreed that he would come to church with us for a Sunday night service. If you have never attended church or only started attending in the last 10 to 15 years, church attendance then looked a bit different than it does today. There were typically 3 services on Sunday: Sunday school, Sunday morning worship, and Sunday night worship. Although I'm not sure we called it worship. Then there was a midweek prayer meeting. That was on Wednesday nights. To be sure, there are a lot of churches that still operate this way, which is how Theo ended up going to church with us on a Sunday night. He didn't want to go on a Sunday morning and have to get up early. Plus, it was a whole morning commitment. He wasn't sure about spending that much time. Sunday night in midsummer, it was hot. I forgot to tell him that we don't wear shorts. That's a whole story. But I didn't wear shorts until 6th grade, ever. After 6th grade, I would wear them, but not to church. So we picked Theo up and we drove to church. While there, we engaged in rituals familiar to me, but not him. Remember, he's never been to church before in his 15 years. I'm not saying it was wrong to engage in those rituals. It was proper, and we should have considered how a visitor might have felt experiencing them for the very first time. This is a whole world of newness to him. Looking back, we did so many things that were muscle memory. We would stand and sing after the offering. Just having an offering had to seem strange to him. We sang the prescribed 3 songs, took the offering, and operated the service normally. The service was over. We stood up and sang the first and third stanzas of some hymn. To be fair, I could not testify in court this is what happened, but it would have been common practice. We prayed and started to file out of our seats. Sitting in front of us was an elderly couple that my family knew well. They were sweet people, and we had known them for years. For the sake of the story, we'll call them the Sugarwells. Mrs. Sugarwell turned around in her seat and said to Theo, My, don't you look comfortable." She looked pointedly at his shorts. I was mortified, and honestly, I wasn't even sure why. I just knew what happened should not have happened. Here is a guy who probably already feels incredibly uncomfortable. He took a risk. To my knowledge, it was his first risk regarding attending church services. Whenever I would bring up visiting again, he would politely turn me down. I can hear someone asking what this had to do with hiding behind God. Well, anonymous someone, I'm glad you asked. There was a culture of hiding behind clothes in that church. Spiritual people dressed in a certain way before they went to church. The obvious implication is that people who didn't dress that certain way couldn't be spiritual. Maybe I'm overstating my case, but if I am, it's not by much. There was an unambiguous code, a code that isn't in the Bible. And the essence of hiding behind God is creating things as necessary or signs of spirituality that are not in the Bible. The code started that those who were dressed professionally. But serious question, did Jesus dress professionally? Did the apostles? Did they ensure that they had their Saturday best on before they went to God? Well, before we answer that, let me tell you a college story. I was early for chapel, a rarity for me. I had a girlfriend on campus then, so it probably had something to do with that. In those days, we had to cross off our names off a pre-printed list to prove that we had been in a chapel service. They lined up 10 or other students with a sheet of our names. Each of those students became what we would call a chapel checker for the year. you could miss 10, which was 2 weeks worth of chapels for the semester. More than that, and you had to pay a fine. Those fines could pile up quickly. And admittedly, I paid my share over the years. This day, I walked up to the coat rack, hung my jacket, and walked over to my chapel checker. I am still determining how one became a chapel checker. Did they have to pass a background check? Did they have to do some sort of special training? Were they the students secretly wanting to work for the IRS when they graduated college? I imagine they were actually friends with whoever picked people for that position, but I don't know. Like almost everything else on campus, this probably had more to do with who liked you and who knew you than anything else. Either way, I had to sign in by crossing my name off. This was the semester I was going to keep all of my cuts until the end. I had my own issues tied to chapel attendance. Maybe God would love me more if I went all the time. Those issues had nothing to do with the school. I walked up to my checker and crossed my name out. We started chatting for a few minutes and walked Kate. She looked me up and down and said words that forever changed my life and world and how I performed at school. Before I tell you the profound words she shared with me, allow me to set the backdrop for you. Our school rulebook stated that first and second year students had to wear a collared shirt with 3 buttons. Yes, I know a student who received a point because his shirt only had 2 buttons. Let's talk about legalism another day. Casual dress slacks, dress socks, and dress shoes. There was an or, and I loved that beautiful little word my first 3 semesters at Bible college. Underclassmen could also wear colored jeans that were not blue and a sweater or Bible college gear. I had 1 blue Bible college sweatshirt and 3 pairs of colored jeans, red, green, and black. You can tell matching was important to me. I wore those 3 pairs of jeans and that Bible college sweatshirt over a t-shirt almost daily. I was well within the bounds of the rules, and I enjoy jeans more than any other pants. No matter how comfortable Dockers wants to tell me their pants are, given my choice, I'll always slap on a comfortable pair of jeans, boots, and a cozy tee with a hoodie. Nevertheless, the rules were the rules, and I was following them. I am and always will be a mama's boy. I can't adequately measure the profound impact my mother had on me. This year, my mom brought me a sweet tie, and I loved it. I thought it looked good on me, and I was proud to wear it because my mom had bought it. This morning, I was up early, so I dressed up. I put on my red jeans and boots, which were okay according to the rules because there was snow outside. I put on a denim shirt. Believe it or not, that was the way to dress back then, and this tie that my mom had bought me. Now let's go back to my college chapel checker. I was chatting with her, waiting for my girlfriend to walk up, when Kate walked up and said to me, "Wow, Joe, you must really be getting your life right with God." This statement struck me as odd on a lot of levels. Kate and I were friends for the first 2 weeks of our freshman year, but we'd only talked a little since then. She did not really know anything about me. Of course, I am sure I had acted in some way that she had found to be wrong or offensive, or she had heard a story, but still to walk up to me and make this proclamation, it threw me off kilter. I had no idea how to respond, so I looked at her and asked what drew her to that conclusion. Here is her response, word for word. I will always remember it. These words were literally like blows to my conscience. She replied, "Well, look at you." She pointed at my tie. "You've been wearing ties, and you're early to the chapel. I'm so happy for you. Good for you. Keep it up." She smiled and walked away. I don't remember anything else about that day. Still, I remember that conversation as if it happened yesterday. As I am writing this, it has been at least 20 years. After this encounter, I started paying attention to the other students around me, the first and second year students who were going somewhere who other students paid attention to. They wore ties daily. They did everything they could to look like the upper level students who had to wear ties and coats. The legalism was so entrenched that a student who had been there for more than 4 semesters but was still academically a sophomore had to wear the upperclassman dress, even though they were in no way an upperclassman. The system was concerned with controlling behavior rather than changing hearts. I realized that I was doing what she said, and I was doing it because I wanted people to think that God and I were tight. In other words, she came to the very conclusion I was hoping people would come to. I wanted people to look at me and think that I was spiritually mature, whatever that meant. In a year and a half, I had learned the game's rules. On this campus, mature people walked a certain way, dressed a certain way, and debated certain things in a particular manner. They talked in a specific code about wrestling with God. I did these things because I wanted to be cool. I had made the right friends and turned my head when the right people broke the same rules as the other people. In short, I had sold out to the system. I was a fraud. Instead of being honest and talking about what I wrestled with God about, I only wrestled with the, quote, spiritual issues, end quote. There were things that the spiritual could talk about, and there were things that you couldn't talk about and still be spiritual. Kate's comments helped me realize I had become the very thing I hated. I never wore another tie that year. I went back to what I called my freshman dress code. It was within the bounds of the rules, and no one thought it was cool. So, little side note here, I'm not sure that anybody would have thought I was cool anyhow, but I was, a kid. Back to reading. I am unsure if I changed who my friends were or if they just stopped being my friends. All of my friends that year would not be people who would consider me a friend, nor would I consider them friends 3 years later when I graduated. This is the most insidious aspect of creating a subculture where behavior is modified, but the heart is not allowed to be expressed. As with any good gang, the message of my Bible college was, you are either one of us or you are not on the team. You look, walk, talk, act like us, or you are out. There can be no compromise, no dissent, and certainly no discussion. Everything is done to preserve the status quo of the gang. Make no mistake, in many respects, Bible college is every bit a gang. It is an overt attempt to change you from the outside in, which is completely backward from how we see the Bible prescribe change for people. To be sure, the ideas of a subculture is found in any group of people. In other words, any group will always have trendsetters who set the standard that others follow. The problem with the Bible college, with the kind of dress code that mine had, is that it fosters the idea that there is a Christian way to dress. No matter how much it is said that there is not, actions always speak louder than words. Always. Let me express it another way. In the house I grew up in, t-shirts were casual. If your shirt had a collar, it was a dress shirt, regardless of how many buttons were on it. When we went out for fun, we wore a t-shirt. When I went to a college, there was a group that believed that t-shirts were not to be worn in public. If you went out, you were to wear a collar, usually what could be called a polo shirt. I now realize this was because the school was full of what would be considered the prep subculture. My problem with this subculture I encountered in college was that it became elevated to spirituality. If you didn't dress that way, you were not as spiritual as those who did. It has nothing to do with the idea that you come from a culture that didn't dress that way. It had to have something to do with your level of spiritual maturity. Now stop and think about that for a minute. How many students do you suppose go to a Bible college struggling with the idea of their relationship with God? How many grew up in what I call fighting fundamentalism, where they were taught they have to earn God's love? Regardless of what is said, actions always speak louder than words. A system that sets up a class system will always override those kind souls who stand before a class and tell us that we do not affect how much God loves us. The system said something completely different. Please understand, this is not about the shirts and ties or hooded sweatshirts. It has to do with the idea that wrestling with certain things or not wearing certain things makes one spiritual. This is especially insidious at a Bible college that is supposed to be about the business of helping you explore and deepen your spirituality. This is about the idea that says, wow, you and God must be tight because you're wearing a tie more often now. That is the way of the Pharisees. That is the path to death and destruction. That is hiding behind God. Now, someone is probably thinking, well, okay, I'm sorry that happened, and it kind of sucks, but it's not like that anymore. Are you sure? I think it still exists today, and certainly there are still churches that unofficially look down on people who don't dress up for church. To be fair to that college, they have adjusted and grown over the intervening years. To be sure, this was less a problem of theirs and more a problem of the actual chapel checker, who, for all we know, has also grown from that moment to now. I want to be clear on that. like the Bible college that I'm talking about, it still exists, but it's different today. And that's part of the hope of all of this. Back to reading. But there's also something else we need to consider. What about the person wearing a suit in most modern day church settings? How often are they judged because they are wearing a suit? I have lost track of the social media memes that I have seen with dressed up couple sitting next to the tattooed couple. The suited couple is always the ones judging the tattooed couple. And of course, they are the hypocrites. Not just hypocrites. They are the hypocrites. But why is this the case? Why must the suited couple be the ones who are judging the tattooed couple? Isn't that the same thing that the previously wrong tattoo person is reacting to? The problem with hiding behind God is that it is often rooted in hurt. And often the God we're hiding behind is a God of our own creation. Those who were previously hurt are now committing the same attacks by which they were injured and are covering it up by hiding behind a God, the God of rightness and a God of superiority. It reminds me of the story of the Pharisee, a religious man to be sure, who stood up and loudly proclaimed, "Lord, I thank you that I am not like other men, cheaters, sinners, adulterers." Of course, the difference today is we would be more likely to hear a prayer about how we thank God that we are not like those poor fools who dress up in suits, sing hymns, and miss the whole point of the gospel. My friend, that is hiding behind God. It is a danger of what happens when we think there is only one way to dress, act, or even talk. We create a system about sustaining the system rather than bringing glory to God. Let's be honest with ourselves. How we dress is primarily an issue of preference. It's not an issue of salvation or even a doctrinal one. It's an issue of taste. We get into trouble when we grab our preferences and desires and make them into a theological sticking point. We create a false refuge to hide in and create circles to keep people out. If you prefer to wear a suit, wear one. If you choose to wear your faith on or your life on your body in the form of art, so be it. I'm too afraid of needles. I'm not doing it. But know this, the minute you start expecting other people to share your opinion of a preference, you're engaging in bad theology. Bad theology is the cause and the end result of hiding behind God. The entire message of the gospel is to come as you are. Come wearing whatever you want or own. But Joe, what about the slippery slope? You know the argument, right? If the line is over there, we should draw another new line over here to keep ourselves away from that trouble. That's precisely what the religious leaders of Jesus' day did. And he called them out for it. Why? Because they were hiding behind their preference or staying far away from the line of demarcation. The law that says you should rest on Sabbath, awesome. We'll add don't work by feeding your animals. We'll move the line given to us a couple of 100 feet for everyone's safety. We'll avoid the slippery slope. Well, what's the problem with that? The problem is that God calls us to storm the gates of hell. They won't prevail against the church that he built. In other words, we are called to live in the dangerous land because that is where we find those who need us most. Rescue the Perishing is a great hymn. You can sing it with or without a suit on. It's a great hymn because it reminds us that the whole point of this ride around the earth is to live like Jesus to those who are perishing. Jesus is merciful. Jesus will save. When we make our clothes some litmus test, we effectively shelter in place and call out to those in danger, feebly trying to shout over the very storm we should be in, attempting to rescue those in trouble. For years, an entire culture would judge someone based on how they dressed. Years later, I was visiting a Christian college I considered attending. One of the guys in the group had a tattoo on his left arm. A girl asked him if he was sure he was a Christian. What would bring his salvation to question? Well, the American eagle on his shoulder, of course. We're not all that far from there today, though, are we? How many people have their love of God questioned because they prefer to wear a suit and a tie on Sunday morning? How many people have their love of God questioned because they're, quote, Christian nationalist? Period, end quote. While this chapter has little to do with politics, it has much to do with the idea that people who express differently may not be saved because they express differently than we do. That is the essence of hiding behind God. Bring all the people together and hide behind a wall of ideology so that we can avoid any uncomfortableness of being forced to examine our beliefs. At a minimum, we've tied the commands of God to something they are not linked to in any way. In the worst of the possible scenarios, we've tied God's love to something he doesn't connect them to. End of chapter. Okay, so what does this have to do with you, my friends, who are not religious, do not care about God? Well, one of the conversations that I've had, so before I write a book, I like to talk about it to people that I trust, people that I like, people that I know. I like to talk about it with strangers. I like to kind of get the ideas going and moving. One of the best ways that I process is verbally. And I have more than a few atheist friends. And they all tell me that book sounds interesting so that they can make fun of Christians because they can't hide behind God because they don't believe in him. But my friends, there's another chapter where I talk about hiding in evil, right? Hiding behind God is anything we do that creates a construct of God where we define God, not God defining him. And I know that brings up a lot of questions, and it is not inclusive in 2024, which is the ultimate sin. But think about how much our society has become its own religion. If you don't agree with us, we shut you down. If you don't agree with us, we cancel you. Many of my pagan friends, many of my heathen friends, many of my spiritual but not religious friends, many of my anti-religious friends, you are all part of a religion. You are all part of a religion that is acting in the same way that the religion you're responding to or reacting to used to react. In other words, you're saying, agree with me or else. And you couch it the same way. No, I'm not saying that. You can believe whatever you want. You're just not free of those consequences. Consequences that you and your friends made up. Disagree with me on the Israel-Hamas situation. We can't be friends anymore. Disagree with me on abortion. I just can't believe that you're fill in the word phobic. We've weaponized relationships. And consequently, we have a loneliness epidemic. I'm hoping to start conversations with this book. I'm hoping that the series will be at least 2 books, maybe 3 books that people find helpful. And I hope that even my friends or friends-to-be who don't believe in God, or would identify with any of those labels, will engage it and have interesting conversations. All right, a bit of a different episode today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like that book. If you want to read more of that kind of stuff, hidingbehindgod.substack.com. You can put in your email, and I